On the final day of the 2006 summer transfer window, English football woke up to a headline that didn't make sense. West Ham United have signed Carlos Tevez and Javier Mascherano, two of the brightest stars of Argentina's golden generation. Two players heavily linked with Real Madrid, Juventus, Arsenal, and Liverpool. Two world beaters in the making, and they were joining a club that had finished 9th in the Premier League. It wasn't just unexpected, it was impossible. Nothing about this transfer felt real, and as the months went by, the football world would discover why. London, August 31st, 2006. West Ham fans scroll their early smartphones and check their TVs again and again, unable to believe what they're seeing. No rumors, no leaks, no build-up. Suddenly, two of the most coveted players on the planet are posing with West Ham scarves at Upton Park. Tevez, the warrior forward who carried Boca Juniors and Corinthians. Mascherano, the midfield general every top club wanted. To sign even one of them would have been a miracle. To sign both was beyond fantasy. The announcement set off a storm of confusion, disbelief, and suspicion. Managers across England were stunned. Fans joked that someone hacked West Ham's website. Analysts searched for explanations and found none. And yet, behind the smiles and the press photos, West Ham had no idea what they had just walked into. To understand the transfer, you must forget everything you know about normal football deals. Because this wasn't normal. This wasn't even football. This was business. Global, shadowy, and complex. The key figure, Kia Jarabchian, an Iranian-born businessman, polished, persuasive, and virtually unknown to the European football audience at the time. But in South America, he was a puppet master. Jarabchian controlled a company called Media Sports Investment, MSI, a private investment group that had struck a powerful deal with Corinthians, one of Brazil's biggest clubs. MSI didn't just sponsor the club, they owned the economic rights of several players, including Tevez and Mascherano. In a world where third-party ownership was legal in parts of South America, MSI had found the perfect business model. Buy the economic rights of top talents, place them in strategic clubs, sell at the peak for enormous profit. Footballers weren't just athletes, they were assets. And in 2006, MSI had two assets ready to be moved. But why West Ham? Why not Arsenal, Juventus, or Madrid? Clubs that had actually bid for the players? The answer is simple. Because MSI didn't choose a club, they chose a pathway. West Ham United, at that time, had something that the giants of Europe did not. They were easy, accessible, uncomplicated. Desperate to rise, the Premier League was becoming the richest league in the world, and placing players there dramatically increased their value. But Jarabchian needed a club willing to accept an unusual agreement. A small transfer fee, no control over resale price, no long-term contract assurances, and, most importantly, allowing MSI to retain economic ownership. No elite club would accept that. But West Ham? They saw Tevez and Mascherano. They saw glory. They didn't see the trap. For MSI, West Ham was a parking spot, a temporary shelf to place the players while negotiating massive future moves. Tevez and Mascherano were essentially being shipped into Europe through a loophole, with West Ham acting as the port. It was a ghost transfer, a transfer that looked real, but the real ownership was happening somewhere else. Then, the strangest thing happened. The players didn't play. Tevez sat on the bench. Mascherano barely made appearances. Alan Pardew, West Ham's manager, seemed unable or unwilling to integrate them. Rumors spread. Did he even want them? Were they forced on him by the board? Were there unseen hands deciding who gets to play? Fans started sensing something was wrong. The Premier League, however, sensed something even worse: fraud. By early 2007, complaints from rival clubs forced the Premier League to open a formal investigation, and the findings were explosive. West Ham had signed contracts they were not allowed to sign. The players were owned by MSI and two other companies, all of whom had the power to move the players at any time, dictate future transfer fees, negotiate without West Ham's involvement, influence team decisions. This violated Premier League rules that explicitly forbade third-party influence, but it didn't stop there. Investigators found that some clauses in the contracts were kept secret, not submitted to the league. The Premier League accused West Ham of entering illegal agreements, hiding them intentionally, and lying during the investigation. The punishment was massive, a £5.5 million fine, the largest fine ever handed to a Premier League club. But ironically, the players were allowed to keep playing, and this decision would change English football history. In the final weeks of the season, West Ham needed a miracle to avoid relegation. Tevez became that miracle. He transformed overnight into one of the league's most electrifying players. Goals, assists, fight, passion. Tevez dragged West Ham out of the bottom three almost single-handedly, scoring the decisive goal against Manchester United on the final day. West Ham survived. Sheffield United, who got relegated by a single point, did not. They would later sue the Premier League and West Ham for over £50 million, claiming Tevez should have been declared ineligible. To this day, the bitterness lingers. The moment the season ended, the truth became impossible to ignore. Mascherano moved to Liverpool, a deal engineered entirely by MSI. Tevez moved to Manchester United, also structured via MSI-owned rights. West Ham earned almost nothing. They never controlled the players. They were never meant to. MSI had successfully used a Premier League club as a stepping stone for two business assets. And suddenly, the football world understood. West Ham wasn't the destination. It was the doorway. The Tevez-Mascherano saga exposed a global system that had existed in the dark for years. Private companies, not clubs, were buying footballers like stocks. They owned percentages of future transfer fees, negotiation rights, image rights, economic control. These investors then placed players in clubs that served their financial strategy, not the player's career path. The West Ham case was so scandalous, it triggered major Premier League rule changes, FIFA reforms, investigations into clubs across Europe, eventual banning of third-party ownership worldwide. It became the moment football realized it was no longer just a sport. It was an industry where the richest actors weren't always the ones on the pitch. Even years later, the full truth remains murky. MSI's real investors were never fully disclosed. Rumors connected the group to Russian oligarchs, South American political figures, anonymous private funds, and criminal networks controlling player rights. None of this was ever proven, but the secrecy only deepened suspicion. Kia Joorabchian would continue to operate in football for decades, representing major stars, influencing transfers, and remaining one of the most controversial figures in the game. As for Tevez and Mascherano, both went on to become global stars, but their careers will forever be connected to the most mysterious transfer in Premier League history. So what was the Tevez-Mascherano transfer really? Not a signing, not a football miracle, not an underdog story. It was a business maneuver, executed in the shadows, using loopholes and legal blind spots to transport assets from one market to another. West Ham United were just the vessel. MSI were the captains. Tevez and Mascherano were the cargo. And the real destination? Europe's biggest clubs, where the real money waited. Even today, nearly 2 decades later, the football world still looks back at that deadline day announcement and asks the same question. How did West Ham United sign Tevez and Mascherano? The truth is simple. They didn't. Not really. They only held the shirts. The real owners were somewhere else, behind closed doors, in offices without windows, pulling the strings of a transfer that was never meant to be seen.